Welcome to the Podkey summary of Omak, Washington. Omak is one of those small cities that tells a much bigger regional story. You've got deep indigenous history, a town built through irrigation and resource booms, a surprisingly important role as a service hub, and a local signature event that brings in huge crowds while also setting off real debate. And then there's the landscape itself, which is kind of intense in every direction. Dry heat, bitter cold, earthquake history, and a recreation economy built around a pretty remarkable stretch of country. Long before Omak was a city, the Okanogan Valley was the traditional homeland of the Silks people. Their trading network stretched into what's now British Columbia, and those connections grew stronger after they acquired horses in the mid-18th century. That matters because it frames the region as a place of movement, trade, and long-standing indigenous presence, not some empty map waiting for settlement. Once non-indigenous settlement expanded, the valley was reshaped by mining, logging, farming, and a lot of conflict over who controlled the land. The Colville Indian Reservation was created around 1872, but it didn't stay intact. It was repeatedly reduced from roughly 5 million acres to 2.8 million, and then cut back further over the next 6 decades. Even the name Omak carries that layered history. One interpretation ties it to the Okanagan place name pronounced Omak, while another points to the Salishan term Omache, often glossed as good medicine or plenty. Omak's early growth wasn't accidental. It was engineered around irrigation and agriculture, especially through the Okanogan Irrigation Project, which helped pull in farmers and make settlement viable at a larger scale. After 1910, the place really leaned into crops: apples, berries, peaches, plums, even watermelons. It's a good reminder that in a semi-arid place, water infrastructure can basically decide whether a town stays small or starts booming. The population numbers show that jump pretty clearly. Omak went from about 520 people in 1910 to roughly 2,500 by 1920, which is a huge leap in a decade. Like a lot of inland western towns, Omak also rode the timber economy, and that story gets rough. The mills went through repeated ownership changes and collapses, and at one point employees bought the failing operations for $45 million and renamed them Omak Wood Products. But the rescues didn't hold. There were later bankruptcies, payroll declined, and the 2009 closure wiped out more than 130 jobs. Part of the mill site was later burned in the 2020 Cold Springs fire, which feels like an especially harsh final chapter. Over time, Omak shifted away from being centered on extraction and toward regional services, retail, education, and tourism. That change is visible in a very specific piece of trivia. The city's Walmart opened in 1993 as the first one in Washington, with about 200 employees at the start, serving a regional population estimated at over 60,000. That little fact says a lot. Omak may be small on paper, but it functions as a practical center for a much wider rural area. By the 2020 census, Omak itself had 4,860 residents, but the broader urban cluster was around 8,229 in 2010, making it the largest urban concentration in the Okanogan region. So, when people talk about Omak, they're really talking about more than city limits. It's where people come for shopping, services, school, and the everyday stuff that holds rural life together. The city had already topped 4,000 residents before the 1980s, then contracted as fruit prices rose and major employers shut down. Growth picked back up later, but between 2010 and 2020, the population barely moved. And that steadiness sits next to a harder reality. Educational attainment is relatively strong by state standards, with about 91.5% of residents finishing high school or beyond. But poverty still affected roughly a quarter of residents in the survey period, including about 34% of children under 18%. That's a pretty clear picture of a regional hub that's valuable and resilient, but still under real economic pressure. Omak's most famous event is also its most contested one. The annual suicide race riders on horseback descend a 62-degree, 225-foot slope and then cross the Okanogan River, and the event can draw something like 30,000 visitors to a city with fewer than 5,000 residents. You don't need much imagination to understand why that gets attention. It's dramatic, it's risky, and it has become central to how many people outside the region recognize Omak. Organizers do require veterinary exams and swimming tests for the horses, but animal welfare groups, including PAWS, In Defense of Animals, and the Humane Society of the United States, have opposed the race because of documented safety concerns. At least one horse died during a qualifying round in 2012. So the race ends up concentrating a much bigger argument into one event: tradition, identity, and tourism revenue on one side, and modern animal welfare standards on the other. It's not a neat debate, and that's probably why it keeps staying alive. The physical setting around Omak has its own strong personality. The climate is semi-arid, with normal July highs around 89.4 degrees and only about 11.6 inches of precipitation in a year. But the extremes are what really stand out. The recorded temperature range runs from -26 to 117 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the kind of spread that makes your closet work overtime. The geology is no less dramatic. The 1872 North Cascades earthquake, the largest historical earthquake associated with Washington, is estimated between magnitude 6.5 and 7.0, with its epicenter near Omak Lake. And that same landscape supports an outsized recreation economy for a small city. Omak Lake is Washington's largest saline endorheic lake, and nearby the Okanogan-Wenatchee National Forest offers hiking, climbing, skiing, hunting, and fishing. So Omak sits in this interesting balance between harsh conditions and outdoor appeal. The environment can be unforgiving, but it also gives the region a lot of what makes it distinctive. That's Omak, a place shaped by indigenous history, land loss, irrigation, timber collapse, regional necessity, and a landscape that doesn't really do moderation. It's a small city, but not a small story. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.